The holiday season had always been a time of warmth and joy for our family. Despite the challenges we faced with my daughter's disability, we had found small, meaningful ways to celebrate. This year, she had meticulously decorated a Christmas tree in our living room, its branches heavy with ornaments, handmade crafts, and tiny lights that twinkled like a winter wonderland. It wasn't just a tree. It was a symbol of hope, creativity, and the resilient spirit of a young girl who refused to let her disability dim her joy. We lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, HOA, that prided itself on rules, regulations, and what it considered community standards. Most neighbors were friendly, some overly invested in HOA rules. And then there was Karen. Karen was the infamous HOA member whose reputation for being aggressive, controlling, and vindictive preceded her. She had a history of confrontations, from petty complaints about mailboxes to arguments over garden gnomes. Despite warnings, she seemed to thrive on conflict, using HOA authority as a weapon rather than a tool for community betterment. That morning, my daughter had just finished placing the final ornament on the tree, a delicate star that gleamed in the early morning sunlight. I stepped out briefly to take a call, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could never have anticipated the horror that was about to unfold. Through the living room window, I saw her Karen approaching our house with an expression that was cold, deliberate, and menacing. Before I could react, she had broken the small fence at the front of the property and stormed toward our Christmas tree. My heart raced, my phone slipped from my hand, and the world seemed to slow. Karen carried a small container of accelerant and a lighter. Within moments, she doused the base of the tree in liquid that smelled faintly of gasoline. I tried to scream, but the sound seemed trapped in my throat. The first spark ignited immediately, sending flames licking up the branches, consuming ornaments, gifts, and the tiny lights that my daughter had strung with care. My daughter's scream filled the house, raw and terrified. Neighbors began to gather, initially confused, their faces registering disbelief as they realized what was happening. The smoke rose, thick and acrid, and I lunged forward to pull my daughter away from the inferno. The flames reflected off her terrified eyes, and in that instant, the cruelty of one person's obsession with control became painfully clear. By the time the fire department arrived, the tree was destroyed. Our living room was charred, the smell of smoke lingering like an unwelcome shadow. My daughter was shaken, crying inconsolably, and I felt an overwhelming mix of fear, rage, and helplessness. Karen had left before anyone could stop her, her footprints leaving a trail of ashes, both literal and metaphorical. In her wake, word of the incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Initially, some neighbors were hesitant to get involved, fearing confrontation with Karen or retaliation by the HOA. But as details emerged, horror replaced hesitation. Security camera footage, which one neighbor had managed to retrieve, showed Karen approaching our home with the container in her hand, moving with intention, and setting the tree ablaze. The evidence was irrefutable. People who had long tolerated her behavior began speaking out. Parents expressed anger that someone could commit such an act in a community that prided itself on family values. Several neighbors recounted previous incidents, long forgotten or dismissed, but now painted a pattern of harassment and intimidation. Some described how Karen had targeted elderly residents or pressured families over minor infractions. But nothing had escalated to violence until now. The HOA board, faced with undeniable proof and mounting public pressure, held an emergency meeting. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she was enforcing community decorum and insisting the tree was a violation of HOA rules. The absurdity of her justification only fueled outrage. Neighbors shared stories of how she had used her authority to bully and intimidate others, and many demanded her immediate removal from the board. Meanwhile, my daughter struggled to process what had happened. She was unable to sleep, haunted by the image of her beloved tree engulfed in flames. Therapy sessions had to be intensified, and family counseling became necessary just to help her feel safe in her own home. Friends from the neighborhood offered support, bringing gifts, decorations, and heartfelt messages, trying to rebuild some sense of security and normalcy. The community's response was overwhelming. Vigils were held, people donated to help repair the damage, and a collective sense of accountability emerged. Karen, who had thrived on isolation and fear, found herself suddenly ostracized. Invitations to social events ceased, casual conversations turned cold, and whispers of legal action began circulating. It was clear that the neighborhood had turned against her. United by empathy for my daughter and disgust at the malicious act, local media picked up the story, framing it as a shocking act of malice in a suburban community. Headlines emphasized the cruelty, the violation of trust, and the resilience of the family affected. Public outrage added pressure on law enforcement and the HOA to take decisive action, ensuring that Karen could no longer leverage her position to intimidate others. The morning after the fire, our neighborhood was shaken but not broken. Smoke still lingered in the air, mingling with the cold winter breeze, a haunting reminder of what had happened. Yet amidst the devastation, a powerful sense of unity began to emerge. Neighbors, who had once kept to their lawns and quiet routines, now gathered at our house, offering support, assistance, and unwavering solidarity. Children came with drawings and handmade ornaments, their small hands carrying messages of hope and love for my daughter, reminding her that she was not alone. The HOA board, facing public outrage, had no choice but to convene an emergency meeting. Karen, predictably, tried to defend her actions, insisting she had been protecting community standards. But the room erupted in disbelief and anger. Security footage, testimonies from neighbors, and the charred remnants of my daughter's tree left no room for excuses. Every eye in the room was on her, unflinching, accusing, demanding accountability. Karen's confident demeanor faltered as neighbors recounted her history of intimidation and harassment, revealing a pattern of behavior that had long been tolerated but was now impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, my daughter, still trembling from the trauma, began to witness something she hadn't before: the strength of a community standing up for her. People she had waved to in passing, parents, teachers, and even teenagers from nearby streets brought decorations, blankets, and gifts. They rebuilt not just the tree, but a sense of safety and warmth around her. Each ornament hung was a symbolic act of defiance against Karen's cruelty, a tangible reminder that love could overpower malice. By the end of the day, our living room was alive again, decorated with care, color, and laughter. Local media coverage added a new layer of pressure on Karen. Reporters interviewed neighbors, highlighting her premeditated actions and the profound impact on a vulnerable child. The story quickly went viral, igniting national outrage. Advocacy groups for children and people with disabilities reached out, offering resources and counseling for my daughter, and reinforcing the message that she and other victims were not alone. The public spotlight forced the HOA to act decisively. Karen was removed from her position, stripped of authority, and faced legal investigations for property destruction and endangerment. For my daughter, the experience became a lesson in resilience. Slowly, the fear that had taken root began to loosen its grip. Therapy sessions emphasized courage and empowerment, and neighbors continued to visit, ensuring that she felt safe in her own home. The rebuilt Christmas tree became a symbol of collective resistance. Its lights twinkled brighter than ever, each ornament telling a story of kindness, bravery, and shared responsibility. The community's efforts sent a clear message: cruelty would not prevail, and together, people could reclaim their space from those who sought to harm. By the time evening fell, the neighborhood had shifted from shock to determination. Children ran through the streets, families exchanged holiday treats, and laughter echoed where once there had been fear. Karen's absence, both physically and socially, was palpable. What she had intended as an act of control and intimidation had backfired, instead galvanizing a community into action. The fire had destroyed a tree, but it had ignited a movement of empathy, accountability, and unity that no one could extinguish. My daughter, surrounded by the love and care of her neighbors, felt safe again, and, for the first time since the attack, she smiled with genuine relief. Months had passed since the horrific night when Karen set fire to my daughter's Christmas tree, but the memory of that cruelty lingered like a shadow. Yet, in that shadow, light had begun to grow. The neighborhood had transformed from a place of quiet tension into a community of vigilant care, resilience, and compassion. Karen, stripped of her HOA authority and facing legal consequences, had become a cautionary tale rather than a presence. Her absence was a relief, a reminder that one person's malice could be overcome when people united for justice. For my daughter, healing was a gradual but remarkable process. The trauma had shaken her confidence, but surrounded by love, encouragement, and unwavering support, she began to reclaim her sense of safety and joy. Therapy sessions focused not only on processing the fear, but also on building empowerment. She learned that her voice mattered, that she could confront injustice not with retaliation, but through resilience, courage, and the support of those who cared. Slowly, her laughter returned, cautious at first, but growing brighter each day, echoing through the house like a promise that evil could not define her. The neighborhood continued to rally around her, turning the tragedy into a symbol of hope and unity. Residents collaborated on community projects, from rebuilding playgrounds to organizing holiday events that emphasized inclusion, kindness, and vigilance. The rebuilt Christmas tree in our home became a centerpiece of these efforts. Every ornament carried a story, a child's drawing, a message of support from a neighbor, or a handcrafted decoration symbolizing strength and perseverance. It was no longer just a tree. It was a testament to the power of collective action against cruelty. The incident also inspired long-term changes. The HOA implemented stricter conduct guidelines, ensuring that no individual could wield authority to intimidate or harm. Security measures were improved, and a culture of accountability became the new norm. The story of the fire became a lesson for the entire neighborhood, that evil thrives in silence, but falters in the face of collective courage. Residents learned the importance of speaking up, standing together, and protecting the most vulnerable among them. As another Christmas approached, the house was alive with joy and anticipation. My daughter carefully placed the star atop the tree, her hands steady and confident. Neighbors stopped by with gifts and well wishes, the warmth of shared humanity filling the spaces that fear had once occupied. The twinkling lights reflected off her eyes, which now shone with pride and resilience. The flames that had once destroyed her tree had unintentionally ignited something far stronger. A spirit of unity, empowerment, and unshakable community bonds. In the end, what could have been a permanent scar became a catalyst for transformation. The family, the neighbors, and the neighborhood as a whole had been tested and they had risen above cruelty. My daughter's experience became a beacon, teaching that even in the face of deliberate harm, love, solidarity, and courage could restore hope. The Christmas tree, once reduced to ashes, now stood taller and brighter than ever, embodying the triumph of compassion over cruelty, resilience over fear, and humanity over malice. The lessons learned from that tragic night would ripple through the community for years, reminding everyone that when people stand together, no act of darkness can ever extinguish the light.